the language of kindness. Harold Matthews had built his empire with words, sharp negotiations, calculated conversations, precise presentations that turned ideas into millions. But standing in the marble lobby of Seoul's Grand Intercontinental Hotel, the 62-year-old businessman felt smaller than he had in decades. His translator had vanished. Simply gone. One moment, Jin was there explaining the customs forms, and the next, Harold stood alone with a folder full of Korean documents that might as well have been hieroglyphics. His biggest deal ever, a partnership that would secure his company's future, hung in the balance, and the contracts were due in his room within the hour. Harold's hands trembled slightly as he approached the concierge desk. The young man behind, it smiled politely, but when Harold began explaining his predicament, that smile faded into confusion. The concierge's English was limited to hello and thank you, and Harold's Korean was non-existent. Panic crept up his spine like ice water. This was supposed to be his victory lap, the deal that would let him retire comfortably, maybe finally take that trip to Tuscany with Margaret he'd been promising for 20 years. Now it was all slipping away because of something as simple as language. He sat heavily in one of the lobby's plush chairs, feeling every one of his years. The marble floors echoed with the footsteps of confident travelers who seemed to belong in this international world that suddenly felt so foreign to him. That's when he noticed her. A young woman in a simple delivery uniform was wheeling a cart through the lobby, her movements efficient but unhurried. She had kind eyes and wore her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that reminded him of his daughter at that age. Something about her presence felt peaceful. As she passed his chair, Harold made a desperate decision. "Excuse me," he called, softly. The delivery girl, her name tag read Emily Chen, stopped and turned. Her smile was genuine, the kind that seemed to come from someone who had learned to find joy in small moments. "I know this might sound strange," Harold began, his voice carrying the weight of his worry, "but I'm in trouble. I have these documents." He held up the folder with shaking hands. "They're in Korean and I need to understand them. My translator disappeared and I have this important meeting and I—" His voice trailed off, embarrassed by his own vulnerability. Emily studied his face for a moment. Not with judgment, but with the kind of understanding that comes from having helped people before. "May I?" she asked gently, gesturing to the documents. Harold handed them over, hope and desperation mingling in his chest. Emily opened the folder and began scanning the pages. Her expression was focused but calm. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, she looked up with a reassuring smile. "These are standard partnership agreements," she said, her English clear and confident. "Very straightforward, actually. The main points are—" And then with remarkable clarity she began explaining each section, not just translating the words but explaining the cultural context, the business customs, the small details that would matter in his negotiations. In less than a minute, Emily had untangled what had seemed like an impossible knot. Harold listened, amazed not just by her knowledge but by her kindness. She didn't ask why he was unprepared or why a successful businessman couldn't handle this himself. She simply helped, as naturally as breathing. "You speak Korean beautifully," Harold said when she finished. "Are you from here?" Emily's smile deepened. "I was born in Seoul, but my family moved to Portland when I was 8. I come back every summer to visit my grandmother and work for her delivery service. She always said that languages are bridges, and bridges are meant to be shared." Harold felt something warm spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years of high-stakes meetings and calculated risks. It was gratitude, pure and simple. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, and meant it completely. "No need," Emily replied, already beginning to move her cart toward the elevators. "We all need help sometimes. That's what makes us human." As Harold watched her disappear into the elevator, he realized something profound had just happened. In his panic, he had been reminded of a truth he'd forgotten in all his years of building walls around success. Sometimes the most important connections happen in the spaces between our plans. The meeting went beautifully. But more importantly, Harold had remembered what it felt like to be helped by a stranger's kindness. It was a language that needed no translation. 6 months later, Harold established the Chen Family Scholarship for Young Translators. Not because he had to, but because he had learned that the language of kindness, once spoken, asks to be passed along.